Good afternoon, everybody. I will now call the Community Safety Committee meeting to order at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This meeting is being held in person and electronically in accordance with the Municipal Act. We don't have any public meetings or open delegations, but we do have a presentation, and that's from regarding Enforcement Services 101, and that's from Tammy Banting, Manager of Enforcement Services, to provide that presentation. So Ms. Banting, I'll now ask you to approach the podium to provide the presentation.
Fashions, whereby it is outlining some of the duties and responsibilities that we have through enforcement services, and then updating you on some key efforts that have been brought forward. Next slide, please. When you're looking at enforcement services, generally speaking, we would enforce 44 different bylaws throughout the community. That ranges anywhere from licensing to animal control to sign enforcement to parking enforcement, just to name a few of them. Each of those address various levels of enforcement throughout the community. Within those, we have designed our staffing as such. We have different levels of enforcement staff throughout in our unit. Level 1 enforcement officers, just to give you a brief description, they deal with matters of licensing, sign enforcement, yard maintenance, those types of enforcement matters. Our municipal law enforcement officers too will deal with more general enforcement matters. So they will deal with parking, parks patrols, nuisance regulations, other items along those lines. I'm not sure why it's echoing, I'm sorry. With respect to some of the changes that have taken place within our unit, we average between 50 and 70,000 items. I won't call them complaints because they are not all complaints. They deal with our licenses that we issue. They deal with permits that we may issue, as well as complaints. So over the course of an average year, they can range between 50,000 and 70,000 items that we will address annually. COVID did change those types of things. During the peak of COVID, we were also tasked with enforcing the provincial regulations that were in place. That added about an additional 11,000 complaints that we were addressing on behalf of the province. During that time, however, we did redirect staff from general parking enforcement to assist with the recoveries and or closures that were within the downtown core. Next slide, please. Current staffing levels. This gives you a very quick picture of our current staffing levels within enforcement. They are divided up, as I had indicated before. There's myself as the manager, 2 supervisors, Brian Keane and Jason Forgrave, senior officer, Jordan DeCarey, who's actually just new with our unit. We also have 11 full-time municipal law enforcement officer level 1s and 3 full-time municipal law enforcement officer level 2s and various part-time employees within our unit that work a variety of shifts. To provide some of the examples, as I had mentioned earlier, our level 1 staff would be the employees that would deal with animal control, permits, yard maintenance, those types of aspects through the office. The level 2, as I had already mentioned, do deal with parking enforcement, nuisance matters, and parks. Property standards officers, while that discipline is currently divided, the officers that hold those positions, the 4 full-time staff that we do have, will deal with true property standards matters, which are structural in nature. So that would deal with roof issues, that would deal with eaves troughs, it would deal with mold, it would deal with improper flooring within a home, those types of things. Yard maintenance will also fall under them, along with our MLAO 1 or level 1 officers that will deal with the exterior matters. Over and above those, all that information will flow through our 6 enforcement services clerks that we currently have. Next slide, please. During the peak of COVID, this gives you a quick snapshot of some of the things that our level 2 enforcement officers would deal with. So during the peak of COVID, we did reduce, as I mentioned, our parking enforcement, especially within the downtown core. We actually had to increase our parking enforcement along the waterfront. As some of you may remember, we did have some issues with businesses being closed. So persons were attending waterfront locations throughout the province, but especially coming in through the Barrie area. So we did redirect staff to be able to address those. Parking now is starting to rebound and all businesses are open, albeit operating at slightly different capacities depending on the type of industry. But we do have staff dedicated to our downtown parking enforcement now. They will patrol those on a daily basis to ensure that persons are following those regulations within our downtown. Those are patrolled between 9 and 5, Monday to Friday. When you look at the other parking enforcement matters, we have mobile staff, also level 2 officers that patrol the community. So they will attend various parking complaints. They also patrol for fire route violations, for school zones, all of those different aspects. Above that, they must also address any other nuisance style complaints that come out through the municipality. When you look at the parking regulations, just to give you a quick snapshot, the traffic bylaw, which I'm sure all of you are familiar with, does have over 60 violations that our officers must address. Anytime they are on any street, at any point, there is likely a parking violation that they would need to address, whether that's speaking to somebody or that's simply, unfortunately, in some cases, issuing a ticket to whichever vehicles may happen to be there. Next slide, please. The next information starts to look at our level 1 enforcement officers and some of the duties that they're required to address. Animal control matters are generally the second highest complaint level that we do have within our unit. On a daily basis, they will respond to a variety of different types of calls related to animal control. That's not to say that we have animals running all over the city of Barrie. We do not, but there are multiple occasions where we are tending to various residents to deal with one situation or another. Business licensing addresses such things as adult entertainment industries, transportation, general licensing matters, in some cases events or certain opportunities that come into the municipality may be addressed by our office as well. Sign regulations, some of you are familiar with, obviously, we deal with a multitude of different types of signs. They would require permits and or approvals through our unit. We would also support building services and development services in reviewing site plans that come forward or building permits that come forward related to signage. The regulations related to some of the businesses, one of the key things I'll point out, as much as we don't do a lot of individual business license types, when you look at the overall activities within that category, transportation being a big one, we license over 5,000 drivers or vehicles to be eligible to operate within the city of Barrie. Each one of those single applications that come into the community have documents attached to those that our officers are required to review and approve. So that would be criminal record checks, driver's abstracts, vehicle safeties, those types of things that come in with each and every application. Next slide, please. Some of the further regulatory matters that we would address. Most of you would be familiar with those. We have fireworks, discharging firearms, lawn watering, other nuisance matters that we would do throughout the community. All of those matters are addressed by either the level 1 or level 2 enforcement officers, depending on who's on duty at the time or the nature of the actual offense taking place. Tree cutting, right-of-way activity, waste management are just a few other ones that we would deal with on a daily basis. To round out some of our enforcement, we're also tasked with the administration and in some cases issuance of permits related to provincial lottery licensing and Dog Owners Liability Act, or livestock damage claims as they come forward. As you can guess, Barrie doesn't get a lot of the livestock claims, but as we take over some of the annexed areas, we did actually have more of those claims come forward. Next slide, please. This particular one is obviously a hot topic. Every time we get good weather back and forth, we have a change in season. These types of complaints do come forward, and because they generally involve a neighboring property, they are definitely one of the items that both ourselves and yourselves will hear about on a regular basis, because I look at it every day. As an example, when I walk out of my house, I could see those violations every day. So with respect to the property standards matters, people use that term to describe both, but they're actually two separate matters, and the legal authority that goes along with them are separate. So property standards in our particular case, we define those to include mold, handrails, low heat in homes, those types of things. So anything to do with the physical home itself. Yard maintenance matters would deal with exterior issues. So the long grass and weeds, the garbage and debris, failing to remove the animal excrement, those types of things would be outdoor and or yard maintenance type issues. When you're looking at some of these complaints as an example, just to give you a good idea, as much as overall complaints throughout our unit, they are low by number. We recognize that they are those types of complaints that are, for lack of a better word, an annoyance to those neighbors, because they do see them every day when it comes across. So when you look at these, this is an area that we wanted to focus on in our review that was directed in 2019. The Enforcement Services Review looked at, or requested us to look at, designing our office in a way that we can provide more proactive enforcement, so that we can provide better hours of operation for all levels of enforcement staff, et cetera, which we did. That particular report was scheduled to come forward in March of 2020. COVID hit around the exact same time, so everyone's focus obviously changed to address those things. So the actual service review did not come forward until November of 2020. At those times, we actually did propose and got approval to change our staffing levels and to change some of the operations to be able to bring forward more proactive enforcement, which I'll address in just a few minutes as we go through the additional slides. But we recognize that these are the types of concerns that are always in someone's face as they're leaving their home or entering their neighborhood or seeing it as they drive down the road. A lot of the other concerns that I had mentioned on the previous slides with respect to, say, animal control matters, we could get 3,000 animal control calls for dogs running at large throughout a year, but no one in this room may have seen those dogs because you have to be in the same street at the same time when the dog happened to go by. So they're not as obtrusive to people. Next slide, please. When we looked at our service review and we were bringing forward various options for council to review and discuss at the time, we also looked at the time to comply or the time to address some of those concerns so that we could increase those matters. This gives you a quick snapshot of generally the timeframes associated with various types of enforcement. It does not dictate all of them, but it does look at some of the timeframes that can come forward and appear to be delayed in our response. If you look at property standards matters, we are legally required to provide a certain amount of time for people to comply with some of the issues. They have the option to appeal those matters. Those appeals can take months depending on when the committees can get together and hear the matters and move forward. Yard maintenance, we are obviously a little bit more flexible on, and we can reduce those time frames. And that was part of our proposals when the in-services review was finished and brought forward to council. We had recommended with certain staffing, which I'll discuss in a few minutes, to bring us forward to 25% more proactive enforcement. The other dog matters, tree cuttings, other matters that the officers have before the courts. We are at the mercy of the court system, so that can be completed in a day, or it can be completed in 2 to 3 years, depending on the type of matter that's brought forward. Next slide, please. When you're looking at some of the issues that we do not actually enforce, we get lots of phone calls, as you can imagine, throughout the years. Some of these highlighted areas you yourselves may hear about as time goes on or receive complaints regarding. So building code matters, development services matters, waste management, those types of items are not governed through enforcement services or addressed through enforcement services. Noise bylaw is one of those anomalies where we do a portion of it and Barrie Police do the other portion of it. Noisy mufflers, things like that, which I'm sure you've all heard. Those are considered to be some moving violations. So those are addressed currently by Barrie Police. They have the authority to legally stop the vehicle under the Highway Traffic Act, where our staff do not. Next slide, please. This particular slide will show you some of the information that was brought out of the review and some updates that we have for our staffing itself. As part of the service review, we had collected a vast amount of information and had shown to council at the time how our calls had increased over that 17-year period that we had not added any additional staff. We had accommodated new bylaws, we had accommodated new complaint levels within our resources at the time. But we all know that our response times were slower, obviously. If you don't have the resources available, you're not able to respond to those calls in a timely manner. Council did approve hiring of new staff. That was actually completed, which was a reason we wanted to come forward tonight too, was to give you an update on that, albeit council had approved the recruitment to increase our enforcement staff related, to allow us to bring forward 25% more proactive enforcement. That was approved to begin mid to end of 2021 after that budget deliberation was completed. That, however, was also in between COVID and in between, much like every other industry, the hardships on trying to recruit staff into place. So our recruitment went through some of 2021. It concluded in 2022, and all the training was completed by the end of the year in 2022. So technically, we are ready to implement our 25% proactive enforcement as of this year. As you all know, industries much like ours, and frankly, every other industry, is having a hard time recruiting staff and getting staff into place and being able to obtain those people needed, qualified and trained, or have their proper certifications in place to be able to come to the municipality and assist us with that. So that has taken us a while, but we are finally there and we finally have everyone in place, and we have the ability to change some of our proactive enforcement. The other thing that we were able to do in 2022 as part of the overall service review, we did change our patrol hours. All the full-time staff, with the exception of the true property standards officers, they all work rotating shifts. We have someone available, we have multiple people available 7 days a week between 7:30 in the morning and 11 p.m. to address basically any matter that comes forward. That being said, we will not go to somebody's home at 10 o'clock at night about their weeds that happen to be too long in the front yard. That would be directed to the next early shift that comes on duty. We still have a reasonableness to attend somebody's home for certain items. If it was to do with incident with a dog, we may attend that home at 10 o'clock at night if it's required to be addressed, but not something along the lines of them failing to cut their grass. That would be addressed the next day. With respect to some of the changes, the other changes that we brought forward, we did look at the live answer hours. During COVID, we had amended them slightly to have a live answer till 8 p.m. That is not the case currently. That live answer for our clerks or the administrative staff is still 8:30 to 4:30. But our message bank that we have available, the officers will go in and retrieve those messages every 30 minutes and respond to them accordingly. So while the officers are on duty between 7:30 in the morning and 11 o'clock at night, they will retrieve those messages. So anybody from the member of the public can record messages and have their incident attended to that evening. Next slide, please. This gives you an idea of what was previously approved by council. Albeit it did take us extra time to have everybody in place and now fully trained. This was approved through the council of the day to allow us the 25% proactive enforcement, giving us a stability in our full-time staff, also giving us the ability to enhance our yard maintenance response. Not only from a complaint response perspective, meaning we can tidy up the areas quicker, but also gives us that ability to do better patrols, to be able to focus on those items before complaints are even received, so that we can have those things already underway before any neighbor would even call us as we go. Will we be everywhere every day all the time? That's not possible with the size of our community, but it will be far better than what we had prior to. And this was approved at the time through the council of the day, which some of you were. And they believe that this, and we too still believe that this is still the best approach for the community with respect to the level of service they are looking for. When you look at the delays that did cause us a great deal of delay trying to get through not only the extra COVID enforcement that we had at the time, but also recruiting and having those experienced people in place and ready to go, which we are able to do at this point. Next slide, please. The other couple things that I wanted to bring up for you were some initiatives that we currently have underway and are looking at moving forward on. In addition to the implementation of our 25% proactive enforcement, which is now ready to go, as I had indicated, we're also looking at implementing a 0 to low tolerance based enforcement practice. With most of these matters, and not all matters will be subject to that, but with most of the matters, it can come across as harsh. And sometimes it may be just that, but there will always be exceptions to the rule. There are always exceptions to any type of enforcement. There's many occasions where we attend a complaint of whatever nature or happen across something, and perhaps there was a recent death in the family or something along those lines. So there are always extenuating circumstances which will take us away from the 0 tolerance type enforcement. But in order to be able to sustain change moving forward and changing people's behavior, you have to have the understanding that there is a process in place, that there is a expectation within our community to keep, and if we use yard maintenance as an example, there's an expectation for you to keep your property to a certain minimum standard. We understand not everybody's going to have gardens. We don't require people to have gardens, but we do require you to cut your lawn and keep the areas clean and park your vehicles on have an operational vehicle in your property. So in all of those cases, we understand that people will take time to realize that there are consequences to their actions, or most of what we deal with results in lack of action, that someone has not done something, which is why we're there. So we are looking at implementing that. And obviously, as we have indicated here on the slide, there would be a large media campaign ensuring that the members of the community are fully aware that that will be taking place. We have some planned reports coming up. We have pending for March, request to incorporate set fines within our yard maintenance regulations, in addition to the service fees. As most of you can understand, while the property owners are ultimately liable for anything that can take place on their property, in many cases, the violation that's occurring is not as a result of the property owner. It is the tenant that happens to be at that particular property. It would be their vehicle that is inoperable, or it would be their garbage they had left in a certain location. So in addition to our service fees, we are looking at applying, with your permission, to the, and not tonight, that report will be brought forward in March, but we are looking to have the province approve set fines so that we can not only hold the tenant responsible, but also the homeowner. We are looking at and currently reviewing the noise bylaw so that we can move items out of the noise bylaw and be able to put it in bylaws which we currently enforce. So barking dog is the one example that I put up there. Currently, it sits within a section of the noise bylaw that Barrie Police would enforce, much like a noisy stereo or a party taking place. We do have animal control regulations, as you know, so we are looking at moving that into our actual animal control regulations. So those are the types of reports that we have planned coming forward in the next month or so. The other service enhancement that we have already done, I've spoken to some of this already, but we have done full rotational shifts with all our uniform staff. That was implemented in 2022. And now that we have everyone in place, it is a full rotational shift, 7 days a week till 10 p.m. and or 11 p.m., depending on which officers are working. And then enhancing the 25% proactive enforcement for yard maintenance. That is currently able to be undertaken now that we have everybody in place. The other thing that we wanted to talk about today was actually the noise enforcement. We are reviewing some other municipalities' regulations as part of our overall report that will be coming forward with respect to different hours of enforcement that they may or may not do in other municipalities. As you can imagine, if some of the items we're going to propose get pulled out of the noise bylaw and put into other regulatory matters, like the barking dog, as the example, we don't work 24/7 all year long. So there would not be an officer from our unit that would be attending to a dog barking complaint at 2 o'clock in the morning. That is not something that we would be doing year round. So there will be some of those changes, and we're reviewing other municipalities' regulations to ensure that we're within the norm, but still looking at a made in Barrie solution, what would work best for us in this community. Next slide, please. Further to the zero or low tolerance type enforcement that we're proposing to incorporate now. And while I say incorporate, it's not that we have not done that in the past, but we are looking at making it something that is applied to more of the regulations that we do now. When you look at some of the occurrences that take place, most of the people that we will deal with on a daily basis aren't generally what we would call willing customers. We're not a retail location. We don't necessarily have a service that we provide to willing individuals on a regular basis. And I know that sounds awkward, but most people don't call and say, please come and give me a ticket, or please come and address these types of things. We are one of the services for the municipality that that are very necessary, and it is to be in place so that behaviors can eventually be changed. Not to say that all behaviors are bad, not at all, but there are standards within the community that we are looking for, that you as members of this committee and or members of council are looking for, and you want to have those brought up and everyone abide by those standards that we put in place. Changing someone's behavior, however, does take time, and it does take a certain amount of consequence. It's not always about a nice approach, maybe isn't the right word, but a softer approach, I'll say that. It's can't always be done with a soft approach. Sometimes there has to be a different consequence or a monetary consequence in order to have that behavior change over time. So that's what we're looking at doing. We understand that it will be difficult. We are taking that approach with more of our enforcement matters. That is our plan following that media campaign that I touched on earlier. And we are bringing that forward. The issue that will arise out of that, however, will be calls and inquiries to yourselves as members of this committee or members of council. There will be calls and emails and so on asking, why is this changed? Or I've been doing it for years and why can't I get the fee waived? Or something along those lines. And we understand that's going to be a difficult part of the process. But trying to get standards within the community adhered to, or trying to get everyone to live up to certain standards or the minimum standards that we have really does take some of that consequence to be in place in order for everyone to change their behavior. When you look at some of the things that have worked and not worked over the years, we understand that there are things out there that until somebody has to follow a certain regulation or somebody has to understand that there's a certain consequence if I don't, parking ticket is a very simple example of that. If someone obtains a parking ticket because they parked over the sidewalk or they didn't pay at a parking machine, they understand there's a consequence. They understand that it was them that parked the car. It was them that had it over the sidewalk. It was all based on their behavior. And that approach needs to be more readily taken with some of the other regulations that we have in order to be able to change that behavior over time to ensure that someone is cutting their lawn. They are depositing their waste in a proper way. They are storing them in proper containers. All of those things need to come hand in hand. But it will end up with more calls and more inquiries as to why there's a change. Frankly, there isn't a change. The regulations are the same. It's just the approach or consequence that go along with this. Go ahead, please. Most of you will likely get these calls if you have not already, but we usually like to post our contact information up there so everyone has it. Our information, day-to-day services do not go through Serviceberry. So I would tell you for any citizen inquiries, they are more than welcome to contact that number with either inquiries or concerns that they may have. As I mentioned earlier, those calls are retrieved every 30 minutes when our officers are on duty. Even if the live answer clerks are not available, those messages will get through to our enforcement staff so they can go ahead and do that. Obviously, yourselves are able to contact myself or Wendy for any kind of general concerns or whomever you feel comfortable with, and bring those concerns forward to us. That is the end of the presentation. The last one just has the fancy question sign.
Thank you, Ms. Banting, for your presentation. Great refresher. Are there any questions from members of committee regarding Ms. Banting's presentation? Councilor Courser, go ahead.
Okay, just a Thank you. I do not envy your position, but I'm glad you're here for all of us. My first question is about the employment numbers. I just wanted a little more clarity on that. For slide number 3, so 11 full-time, currently 3 vacancies, all part-time. So there would be normally 14 employees total. And there's no part-time employees right now, correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Corser, that's correct. There is not.
Okay.
We do still have vacancies within our unit, even though we've been able to fill quite a few of them. We do still have those 3 part-time positions and then other part-time positions in our level 2 officers.
Okay, just the numbers are, okay, so are these numbers comparable to a city this size?
In our enforcement services review, they were bringing us up to this point. They are generally comparable. Yes.
Okay, also, with, I had a few here, let's see, so there's seasonal initiatives, for things like pollinators, like No Mow May, or like, flower gardens that are naturalized for pollinators in our city. That, is there any consideration for that, for complaints against property standards?
For the No Mow May, no. The bylaw currently does not have an allowance for that. Natural gardens, however, are permitted. Within our yard maintenance regulations, we do allow natural gardens, but they need to be just that. They still need to be a garden, for lack of a better description, where the remainder of the yard is mowed and maintained. It's not a go back to the wild in your front yard. You can have a manicured lawn with open naturalized areas. There are many people throughout the community that do. There are many that work with our horticultural center and work on pollinators. They work with other organizations within the community to ensure that they do have a crop of those types of items, but it wouldn't undertake the entire property.
Okay, so in May right now, like for like this kind of initiative, that would be against property standards to participate in that.
Any true lawn,
Okay.
yes, they would still need to maintain those.
Okay, also, can you speak a little bit about bylaw officers in the challenges you have in the school zones?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Corser, it is a great challenge for all of our staff. With the number of schools that we have and numbers of staffing, we would never be able to hire enough staff to have everybody, nor is it reasonable to have staff every single day at the school doing the enforcement. That's not reasonable for the community as a whole. The schools, however, there is not one school in Barrie that does not have challenges. There are more and more parents for a variety of reasons that choose to drop off their children and pick up their children. And I'm sure there's multiple reasons for those, but they are causing issues on the not only surrounding homes for their own private driveways. We have complaints that, you know, parents will just pull up and stop in someone else's driveway and take their child across the street to school, or they stop in no stopping areas, they stop in the no parking. As I'm sure some of you are aware, I'm a parent myself, but I can honestly admit that I was never that aggressive. It surprises me how aggressive that some parents can be when our officers are there. We've had officers spit on over the years. We've had vehicles race past them. We've had officers get pushed and frequently yelled at, which unfortunately is a little bit of the nature of the business that we do. But it is a great deal of a concern in school zones.
If I could follow up on that, what supports do you have from Barrie Police Services in that sense? Because you're speaking about what I live in a school zone, so I actually experience, I've seen this. I know what you're talking about. What supports does Barrie Police Services have for bylaw officers in those kind of situations? Because these are assaults. These aren't something that I would think that a bylaw officer would actually be prepared or trained or would be in a position to handle somebody shoving or spitting them. So in that situation, is Barrie Police Services called in at the incident, or how is that handled?
To be honest, it depends on the incident. Unfortunately, our staff do have to deal with those types of issues on a regular basis. I'm not saying it's right, but it does come as a part of the business, and it doesn't matter if you're in a school zone or you're dealing with another industry. It does happen, but depending on the type of incident, we do contact Barrie Police and we will have the matter followed up with them. It does not always result in charges against that individual, but we do call them in for support, so they are there when we need them.
Okay, I'm glad to hear that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Corser. Great questions. Wow, like knocked my list out. Any other members of committee have any questions or comments at this time? Non-members of committee? Councillor Congo, then Councillor Reitman.
Thank you, Chair Morales. Thank you for the presentation, Ms. Banting. I had a couple of questions, and I guess one, because I'll lead off from Councillor Corser's around the No Mow May. It was an item for conversation at last term's Active Transportation Sustainability Committee about how we promote some of the curbside programming with the communications or maybe a sign on the lawn that supports the city program, but also then I think mitigates what we were hearing were high call volumes to enforcement services, and some of it landed around an awareness of education. So, how do we balance those pieces? So, would there be data and information we should be seeking through your team back to Active Transportation if we want to support some type of education campaign around how to get people to opt into No Mow May, but reducing, of course, all the calls to bylaw about what is acceptable and not acceptable per standards?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Congal, it would depend on what you were looking for. Obviously, we do track the concerns or complaints that come through our office. Various items related to those we would have access to information on. It depends on what you were looking for, or maybe what the committee was looking for. We could tell you how many resulted in being true natural gardens versus I just didn't want to cut certain areas of my backyard. But so we would have some. If the committee was looking for something, I may not be able to accommodate all information they may want. But I do know through those discussions that took place last year, there are some accommodations, I will call it, that we can make if they are participating in a sanctioned, this home has been authorized to do that for the month of May. They have the proper education that you're talking about, where it's true pollinators. It's not that I just didn't want to maintain certain parts, and they still go ahead and maintain the rest of their lands to ensure that it still meets those municipal standards. There are some allowances that we could either build into the bylaw or work through for a specific period of time, if that's what we're looking for, whether it's through council or it's through just a public initiative that we are looking at one point in time, whether it be the No Mow May, that may be an option, but it would have to be somewhat controlled to a certain extent, so that they are with that community group. It is an approved location. They understand the parameters that they have that go along with it, not just I choose not to maintain my property for that month.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. And my other and last question is really if you could add a bit more information around the approach to fines. And I know we've had conversations about certain situations that are repeated polls on bylaw and kind of a chronic, I'll call it a chronic condition. And we talked a bit about stepped fines. And I was wondering if when you're bringing back some of the information about fines and enforcement and kind of feeling a difference, because the standards have always been there, but you're going to feel a bit more of a consequence. Can you speak at all if you're taking a stepped approach to fines on certain areas where you get high volumes or repeat offenders where the current fine doesn't seem to be a deterrent?
Sure. Through you, Chair Morales, to Councillor Kungal, we do have that in place under our service fees. Currently, the standards, as I mentioned, we do have enforcement standards that are in place. With yard maintenance as an example, if we have been to the residence within the last 12 months and it's a rolling 12 months, then we can go to the secondary fee, service fee. Right now, really even a rolling 12 months is a lot of time. If we were at your property last year and asked you to maintain it and provided you the information on the standards and what you need to do, even rolling 12 months is a lot. And we are trying to step back from that and not allow that period of time. If we have already been to your property and you now are fully aware of the standards that you're required to keep, ownership is the same, maybe tenants are the same, all of that information is the same. There shouldn't be necessarily that gap of 12 months before you get the next fine. So that's really what we're looking at doing. Some of those stepped violations or stepped fines and service fees are already in place. We're looking at tightening up those time parameters so that there isn't as much of an allowance. With respect to the fines from the province, we are looking at doing some of that. So there will be some increased fines, not necessarily second violation, but based on type of violation. So there'd be higher fines requested from the province for those violations that are a little bit more extensive.
Thank you. No more questions.
Thank you, Councillor Kungal. And Councillor Reitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In light of the time and the agenda, I'm going to pass and I'll email her directly.
You read my mind. Thank you, Councillor Reitman. Thank you, Ms. Banty, for the presentation. I'm going to nix my questions for that exact same reason. I presume we're still going to have you maybe for a couple of minutes just in case we need you. Okay, perfect.
Sure. Thank you.
So now the presentation's over. There's no standing items or committee updates, no referred items, no advisory committee reports or reports to committees. However, section 8, we do have items for discussion. 8.1 is an agreement with school board use of facilities. Ms. Cook, can a member put it on the floor without reading it, or should we read the item?
To Chairman Lass, we could read it out if you'd like, or we can just do the title of the item for
Okay.
the sense of time.
Okay, it was posted
Yes.
publicly and all members have it. So item 8.1, if I could have a committee member post it as written. Mayor Nuttall, posted on the floor by Mayor Nuttall. Perfect. Mayor Nuttall, go ahead.
Thank you. And I don't think I need a ton of time on this. Foreseeing that the next two, I think, will take some substantive time. We have hundreds of millions of dollars of infrastructure sitting in the city that's paid for by the taxpayers. To quote the former finance chair, there's only one taxpayer. And the reality is they've already paid for all of these gyms to be built. Some of those are used, some of them aren't used. But the reality is that we don't have the capacity to provide the services that we want to be able to provide around the city on the capital side. We certainly struggle on the operating side as well. And I think that what the provincial government is asking school boards to do at the moment is to actually create community hubs in the schools, helps them with their financial plans. It also helps with obviously providing a better quality of life in those communities. And I think the final thing is that, there's an association between a lack of services and some underprivileged areas in our city, and where those two pieces meet and overlap, I think are high impact areas for us to be able to work with the school board. And I've met with the school board already with a couple of members of their trusteeship, and certainly some staff as well. And it looks like, for the first time in a long time, we're going to be able to be in a position to actually have a partnership with the school board going forward. And I think that that's really important, because if we can figure out how to work together it will hopefully have an impact across our relationships in terms of planning, planning schools out so we can deal with some of those parking issues. I think and stopping issues we just heard about earlier, as well as looking at the capacity to have partnerships going forward. When you think about the community rec centers that we're talking about in Southeast Barrie and Southwest Barrie over the next decade or so, you know, are there opportunities for us to work with the school boards in terms of having those on a same site, co-use of gym services, co-use of some meeting space to be able to save some capital dollars and perhaps provide an even better experience. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to work with the school board going forward, and hopefully members of committee will support this motion.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. Any comments from members of committee? Seeing none, any comments from non-members of committee? Councilor Reitman.
Just very quickly, I'm very supportive of this. I think that it's long overdue. And I just wanted to mention that Councillor Hamilton and I are putting forward an item for discussion to invite some school board representatives to meet with committees and to talk about some of these things, but also to talk about this whole question, a matter that was raised about traffic and parking and dropping off children. And there's a whole lot of things that we can work on together. So I think it's a great start, and I think we should really build a relationship with the school board.
Any other comments from non-members of committee? Seeing none, I'll echo myself. Sorry. Sure, go ahead, Mayor Nuttall.
Sorry, thank you, Mr. Chair. To Councilor Rittman's point, I think it's really important. I look at this as a restart of the relationship between us and the school boards. And it's really important that we don't finger point on the past, and we just try to find where the opportunities are for the future with them. So I would just I know that's where the two of you are coming from, but I just reinforce that for all of council. Let's make sure we focus on the opportunities and not on the finger pointing, because I think there has been some missed opportunities in the past, to say it in a nice way, but we're not going to be able to rectify those. That's it, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. Basically what I was going to say, I'm supportive of this. The relationship between the school and the public board has been lacking in the past, but moving with an eye to the future, I think this is great. And especially leveraging existing facilities and neighborhoods to have more complete communities. So seeing no other questions or comments, I'll call a question to the vote to members of committee. All those in favor, please indicate. 1, 2, 3. Okay, that's unanimous. I'm in favor too. So that item for discussion passes and up on its way to general committee. Next item is item 8.2, enhancement of proactive property standards bylaw enforcement. Everybody has it as printed. I'll read it quickly. It's not too long. That staff in the Legislative and Court Services Department report back to general committee outlining the additional resources that would be required to allow enforcement services to allocate approximately 50% of municipal law enforcement officer and property standard officer time to proactive enforcement of city bylaws, with a specific focus on bylaws related to yard maintenance and property standard matters. Could somebody just put that on the floor for discussion purposes? Yeah, Mayor Nuttall has put on the floor as printed. Does anybody want to speak to? I see Deputy Mayor Thompson putting up his virtual hand. Go ahead, Deputy Mayor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. Just to be quick and pretty direct to this, I appreciate the motion and the follow-on motion after this. So I won't talk much about it, but I just think that we already have approved a proactive approach and a little bit of a difficulty to get all of our officers hired and have the full ensemble. So I actually think we need to maybe, we have some really restraints on staffing. So this all feeds into our operating budget. We need to hire a lot more officers to perform 50-50. And I know there was some discussion of 1/3, but it would still need to hire more officers. So I think before we get data from having a proactive approach, which was asked in the previous council, we really haven't seen the numbers. So I think by going ahead with another plan is actually a little bit premature. So what I'd like to do is refer this motion to I don't know, this would be to the clerk, like if we need a date or around this time in 2024, after the proactive approach, to come back to this
Yeah.
committee.
Thank
with
you, Deputy Mayor.
numbers.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Thompson. I'll take your question first if we need to go to staff. So Ms. Banting, I know exactly where you're kind of coming from, and I agree based on the excellent presentation about let's see the rollout happen. And I'm a sponsor of this motion, so I'm putting my money where my mouth is. Ms. Banting, how long would you want to see new officers essentially be doing their job? I wrote this down when you were talking, before review of the new data, the new enforcement is usable by your department in a meaningful way that could communicate data to council that could then make tweaks? How much runway do you need?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, but I would say that we could give preliminary numbers, at least to how many proactive matters that we have come across. So that would give us a brief number in, say, 6 months. It would just be a preliminary data. This is what we've done from a proactive perspective, not just complaints received, but a true proactive perspective, preliminary numbers in 6 months. But to Deputy Thompson's comment, you really can't look at full change of behavior in that short a time frame. So it would be a year before we would be able to have a fulsome review of what has happened. Has anything changed? Has our with our proactive measures in place, have we seen a reduction in the amount of calls that we're getting, in the amount of complaints, or are you getting less calls, complaints from neighbors?
So to capture the seasons, because 6 months is one thing, but that's technically 2 seasons, 2 quarters. Okay, so based on that information, Deputy Mayor Thompson, the reason I'm kind of filibustering a bit is once you say that you want to defer, deferrals are non-debatable. So I just want to get clarity of, I guess, procedure into how we're deferring this, because we're not referring it to another committee. We would be deferring it to a future meeting of the Community Safety Committee. You can do whatever you would like, but likely 2024.
Point of order. I thought that referrals were undebatable, deferrals are debatable. So as long as it's being deferred and not referred, we can continue to speak to it.
Perfect. Point of order accepted. Thank you. I was wrong. So go ahead, Deputy Mayor Thompson, if you want to elaborate on your thinking here.
Actually, I've said what I need to, and I understand, and I tried to do it in the best way possible. And I know that yourself, you've worked on this for the concerns that I've heard at the door and stuff. But I think it's a little premature, and I think that we need to give staff the time. And like I said, by having a report come back, it takes time. And when they ask to do a 50-50, we need 7, 8, 9 more officers. It's quite expensive. And right now, I think that we've got to kind of slow down and see what the proactive approach, and then we'll take it from there.
Perfect. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Thompson. Mayor Nuttall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if you'll give me the liberty, I would like to speak to kind of both of these items at the same time, being 8.2 and 8.3, because I think that they are maybe not identical, but they're trying to affect the same issue. And the issue that we're facing, and specifically, if I can speak to Councillor Ritma's area and go from there. The issue that we're facing is that there is way too much student housing that's not student housing. And the result of that is it's literally bursting out onto the streets. And it's having a negative impact on the community around it. And that's not to say anything negative about individuals who are studying at either a high school or a college here. It's to say that there's an improper use of a of a building, in my opinion. This just one guy, you know, who knocked on probably as many doors as Councilor Rittman did in the area there. But it's very, very, very difficult over there. And you know, I was I think half aware of a presentation coming forward at the end of March. Our clerk kind of gave me a heads up that that would be coming forward, and so I look forward to seeing that. The increased enforcement being proposed by the chair, you know, I'm willing to accept that we need to let the program run in a fully employed scenario, complemented scenario. The future of what we do to protect areas from being vastly overpopulated in the sense that what they were built for or where people invested is a very complex one. And it's a complex one because we are not the only regulators. The province of Ontario is a regulator in this as well. And they're right now changing the laws to increase the amount of individuals or units that can exist on properties. It's part of what we're discussing all the time in terms of Bill 23. And so I would say my initial conversations and what I would have liked to see would be a blend of what the two individuals around the table have put together. And I don't know what that blend looks like or how it fits together. I knew that it needed to come together at the same time. And then seeing what our public service is going to come back with. I really do think that at some point, if it's not tonight, and if these are going to get moved back for 12 months, I need to see real numbers about what's happening in the East End of Barrie, because it's all anecdotal at this point. So I don't know if these folks are from the East End and that's why they're here. No. Okay. So I speak to people in the East End all the time and I get one-on-ones, but then it's like you've spoken to 100 people. And what I haven't seen is there's this many houses that have this many folks in that were actually meant for, you know, a lesser amount of people. And that translates into parking issues, garbage issues, you know, absentee landlords where folks aren't having their lawns cut. It's a mess. I mean, there's no nice way to say it. And I think the college has done some work on this with Councilor Rittman was part of the Town and Gown Committee. And I think staff are constantly responding to these issues. What I haven't seen is a comprehensive review to say this is the delta. And if there's a delta that exists, which is, let's say, a majority responsibility of what's houses being turned into student housing, that delta is having a negative impact in two ways. Number one, on the residents around it, but number two, in artificially increasing the cost of housing in the northeast ends of the city of Barrie in a time where we have a housing crisis. And those houses weren't meant for the things that they're being used for. So how is it that we get from where we are, right, to where we need them to be? There's good built form student housing in the northeast end of the city of Barrie that's sitting empty right now, while we have houses that were built for families with 8 and 10 people in them in some cases. And it's not, things aren't aligning the way that they were planned out to be. And, you know, giving staff the time to go and take the strategy that's now has a full complement is one step. I think over time, we need to get the data to say, this is the delta, and this is how we help align those who need housing in this type of housing, and we help those who need housing in that type of housing, and we actually able to align those people with the built form that exists. Those are my comments.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. Any other questions or comments from members of committee? Councilor Carson.
Yeah, I door knocked and through my ward, I actually made a goal to try to hit every single door and I just about hit that goal. And the conversations that I was having with people, it's not just college students. It's not, we can say it's college students partying, it's college students doing this and not looking after the property and too many people in a house. But it's not just college students anymore. We're having a housing crisis throughout our city. And I know that in my area, it was not a majority of college students that were causing the problem or that was contributing to the issues that I was hearing at the doors. So I think that it has part of the reason maybe why the college is this housing is partially empty is because that's not all who is creating the housing crisis, because it's unaffordable to live here. So people are renting rooms in houses they're being charged an absorbent amount of money for, and the properties are not being looked after. So I think that this is just the point that the student housing may not be the whole issue, the whole picture.
Thank you, Councillor Corser. I have nothing to say. That's great. Mayor Nuttall, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Corser. What I said at the beginning was I was speaking about Councillor Rittmer's ward, not Ward 4. And there are issues that exist around the city, and there is a housing crisis. But the predominant issue in Ward 1, and I would love for you to join me one day, we can go hit some houses, is consistently the same message back over and over again. And that is where we've had the lion's share, if you will. But in every ward of the city, make no mistake, there's either areas or specific homes that we heard similar concerns in. But in terms of where we heard it the most, it was over in Ward 1. And that's what precipitated the conversation that started Councillor Rittmer's motion for this evening, was the conversation that we both had after the election based on all of that feedback.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. Any other questions for members of committee? I'll make a couple before I go to non-members committee. I couldn't agree more with you, Councillor Corser, and Mayor Nuttall, with the intents that we want to achieve with. My comments are going to be to the item before us right now. I'm a longtime Ward 1 resident, and I'm actually not surprised about some of the deltas, Mayor Nuttall. The reality is, and this is easy information, and if there's a future way we can all package it together, that's great. The pains are everywhere for bylaw enforcement. Councillor Corser, they're definitely in Ward 9, but I'm aware that they're not in Ward 9 as much as the North End, and they're not. And once you narrow it down even more, not as much as Ward 1. And the reality is, the Georgian College, and on the spot, I don't have the number, but has increased their enrollment by thousands of students and have not kept up with building housing. The private market has also not kept up with building housing. So those are two different things. And this is not blame. This is an objective comment. So when you increase thousands of students and you don't increase supply of the proper built form by a compatible amounts, like the city of Guelph did, like a University of Waterloo did, like Laurier did, let's not be surprised about the issue. And additionally, and I'm speaking objectively, when you look at approved, so rezone applications approved and then actually built units around the city, Ward 1 legs. And what I mean by that, objectively speaking, is that you don't see active applications. Members of the public can go on barrie.ca/developments right now. And some of those files, I believe 37 Johnson was actually, I don't count that because the province forced that one. So files that have actually gone through the city hall process and then actually got built are extremely low numbers. I may be wrong, but the last time, Mayor Nuttall, that I can think of a significant one was where those townhouses on Blake Street where the Lions Club, I believe you were on council at the time. So when you have an area that is experiencing high growth, that has turnover, an annual turnover every year, and that's consistent, has a magnet, has an anchor, that being the college, and you're not adding appropriate housing in that area of the appropriate built form, you're gonna have leaks. And you're going to have people going to inventory that was not meant for them. And then you're going to have friction points with existing members of the established neighborhood and the addition. So Mayor Nuttall, if we can, have a way to address that reality of college growth, address the lack of supply in the East End, maybe it leaks a little bit into Ward 2 and Ward 3, and how we can roll that into this motion and potentially the next one, that would be a great solution for the whole city. Any comments from non-members of committee? Councillor Nixon, then Councillor Reitman.
Thank you, Chair Morales. I just want to echo what was said around the table by everyone else, and there's a lot of truth to all of it. Affordability of housing is all over the city. It's a problem. It's a problem all over the country. But I think one thing that the cities that have the worst or the most difficult, challenging to deal with, and they all have one thing in common, is that most of them have colleges and universities in them. I mean, we look at the report from, it's no coincidence that Guelph and Waterloo, and these are the cities that are putting things in place, you know, so we definitely need more student housing, and that's a big part of the problem. It's not the only part of it, but that's something that we definitely need to look at. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Nixon. Councillor Reitman.
Thank you, Chair Morales. And I agree with everything that's been said around the table. And I'm also extending an invitation to everyone around this table that wants to go for a walk with me. I'm happy to walk with you through some of those streets that the mayor was talking about. And I can tell you right now that what we've been doing in the past is not working, and therefore we need to do something different. Now, I don't have a big problem in delaying this for a year to allow Ms. Banting and her enforcement officers to make a big change, and to make a big change in Ward 1. I think the other part of it is that I'm sure that each member of this council does not get the level of calls and emails that I get. I get 1, 2, or 3 a day. And that speaks to a problem for sure. And I'm very much appreciate Ms. Banting's comments about trying to drive compliance rather than enforcement, because I think that that is the way to go. And the Town and Gown Committee has been working diligently with Georgian College and building a bridge between the city and the college, so that we are doing a lot more of communication to students. And of course, we have to keep doing that because it changes every 3 months. I think that one of the issues that we are dealing with here is the fact that we actually have student-built housing or purpose-built housing sitting vacant right at this moment. And it's like, what's going on here? And what's going on is the quotation marks gray market that is taking up some of that capacity that would normally go into purpose-built housing. And I don't want to drive anybody out of housing, but I certainly want them to be in appropriate housing. And as has been mentioned, we have had issues where there's significant overcrowding, and then all of the other problems start coming out: parking, garbage, all the rest of it. And I think one of the real issues that enforcement is having is that we it doesn't really help if the grass is not cut for us to send a letter to the property owner who lives in Calgary.
So Councillor Reitman, I'm just going to keep you on 8.2 for now.
Yes, it sounds to me like we're kind of doing the two
So
at the
Councillor
same
Reitman,
time.
I'm going to keep you on 8.2. I have a conflict on 8.3, as you know, and you've known that. So I'm going to keep you on 8.2.
Pardon me. Okay.
That's okay. That's why they're separated. That's okay. You can make your comments on 8.2. I gave a little bit of leeway to some of the other comments, but now in terms of not finding the owner, that is specifically to 8.3. So I won't be giving lenience on 3.2. So if you can finish your comments on 8.2.
Sure, appreciate that. Yeah, I think that we really do need to move to a new system that actually improves. And I agree. I think we need to work out those details. I think the Waterloo bylaw does a lot of that what we're looking for.
Councillor Reitman, please stick to 8.2.
Okay, sorry. All right, I'll close my comments right there. How's that?
Thank you, Councillor Riepma. I appreciate the invite to look at Ward 1. I've looked at it for over 2 decades. And I wanted to thank Mr. Hilton for the email he sent earlier. All of council got it, and I saw you responded to it there. I think we can maybe wait a couple of days to join you. There's 23 pictures, Mr. Hilton included. I believe Mr. Hilton said just as of today, you dated it as of February 15th. Yeah, so it's 23 items of, sorry, nope, property bylaw enforcement. Yeah, I'm not speaking to your letter, I'm speaking to specifically your pictures about enforcement, so increasing proactive enforcement. So I think there's 23 issues right now in Ward 1 that can be addressed with proactive bylaw enforcement or the existing model that we have. So as a result of that, non-members of the committee, go ahead, Councillor Hamilton.
Sorry, just one question. And again, I don't want to get into the next item either. So correct me if I need to wait for the next one. I just would like to redirect to Ms. Banting on this, just to get some of her input. I understand both of these items are very similar in the fact that we're trying to achieve the same outcome, right? We've identified a problem. We've identified 2 different ways to handle it. One through proactive enforcement and more enforcement, and one through sort of a next step, which is licensing. Ms. Banting, to you, do you think that with this now full complement of staff in enforcement bylaw, what is your take just initially on this? Wait 6 months and a year to see how this plays out from a proactive standpoint? Do you think that would help with some of the issues that have been identified in Ward 1? Or do you think right off the bat, like this is bigger than just enforcement, and we do need to consider alternative ideas or options?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Hamilton, I believe that any type of proactive, along with a zero or low tolerance, will change behaviors. It does take time. We all know if we visited anywhere, we understand we need to pay for parking when we go places. We understand that there's a consequence if we don't. I mean, that's a simple example, but it does go back to having the resources as well as having the ability, and it will call for support from members of this committee and council, because there will be inquiries, there will be those complaints about our actions, or at least the type of action, not the personal action, but the type of action that we are proposing to take. If there are consequences, we understand human nature. We learn from those things going forward. Will it solve everything? I'm in no position to tell you that it will, but I do believe it will help with a lot of the issues. It won't change whether someone moves into purpose-built housing or another home or another location that it may be far more reasonably priced, etc. But it will start to change that behavior that impacts the community as a whole. You know, when I drive down the street.
Yep. Thank you for that. That's exactly what I was looking for, because I agree we need a sort of multi-tactic approach here. And so I think by the wait and see approach, and Rob, I think you were bang on with that, to see how this proactive approach pans out, combined with the comments that you made earlier about working with the college and really looking at, I mean, what Alex said as well, repurposing people where they should be living. So supportive of those 2 approaches. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Councillor Hamilton, and staying in those unique confines right now. I'll just say a couple comments because I was a sponsor of this motion specifically to 8.2. I'm glad we're having this discussion. Ms. Banting, incredible presentation. Even I learned something new, and again, I've seen it a lot of times, so I'm always thankful to learning new things. And I just want to say the reason I brought this forward was not to jump the gun on staff. It's such an important issue. And again, if I heard what I heard in the South End, I can only imagine what Councillor Course is hearing, what people in 1, 2, 3 are hearing. So this is definitely an issue that's of importance. Hearing the comments from my colleagues, Deputy Mayor Thompson, everybody, I think we just need data. Otherwise, we're replicating the effort, and we might not need to. Maybe 25% is a good number. Maybe it's up to 1/3, 33. Maybe it's 50. So I think the fact that we're having discussion is good. And obviously, there's lots of costing pressures for budget and operating specifically to 8.2. So I have no issue with this being deferred to a meeting in Q2 of 2024 or Q1. If somebody wants to move that. Mayor Nettle, Deputy Mayor Thompson. Okay, Deputy Mayor Thompson, can I get a quick head nod? Yes. Okay, so Deputy Mayor Thompson's moving a deferral motion to defer item 8.2 to a meeting in Q2 of 2024.
Sir, just a quick question. How does that align with the budgeting process? Because if there is a cost incurred with the feedback that we obtain in terms of having to hire new, if that's after the budget approval, just
Yeah,
wondering
fair.
if that matters.
Fair enough. I'm gonna, I'll start with Ms. McAlpine on that one.
Thank you, Chair Morales, through you to Councillor Hamilton. It is to obtain a full year and address all of the seasonal aspects. It wouldn't align with the budget in 2024 as enforcement, even with a lower tolerance or a zero tolerance approach, is never full cost recovery. A rental housing bylaw is also not full cost recovery. So neither one of those would achieve full cost recovery. As with the enforcement services review, the recommendation came forward in November of 2020 for this additional staffing to be implemented in 2021, which was actually spread over 2 years budget because of the financial implications. So I would anticipate a similar approach where staff would come back after the first year's review. And then if there was a recommendation, it would be for a future year's budget at that point in time, unless, for example, some grant became available or something like that.
Perfect. Thank you, Councillor Hamilton. So just to repeat for the clerk and deputy clerk, Deputy Mayor Thompson moving a deferral motion to defer item 8.2 to a Q2 meeting in 2024. Any questions or comments from members of committee? Non-members of committee? Seeing none, all those in favor, please indicate. Perfect. Unanimous. Thank you very much. Okay, so for item 8.3, before it goes on the floor, Ms. Clerk, I'd like to declare potential pecuniary interest on this motion. I've talked with the Integrity Commissioner and I have a potential pecuniary interest as written because I'm a landlord. The Integrity Commission has advised me that if there are any tweaks to the motion as printed, that my potential pecuniary interest might go away. So I might be able to re-engage on the conversation if there's amendments, not if there's deferrals, because that's still discussing a deferral. So I'd like to note that, and I am the chair. So Ms. Clerk, has my item been documented?
Yes, Chairman Wallace, it has.
Okay, perfect. I will now be handing the chair over to Councillor Corser for the tabling of item 8.3.
Hey, Madam Clerk, has Councillor Morales' conflict been noted?
Yes, it has, Councillor Corser.
Okay, thank you very much. For item 8.
Point of order. Madam Clerk, I think that Councillor Morales may have been more prepared for this than I was in regards to my own ownership of a rental property in the city of Barrie. So out of an abundance of caution, I think that I should actually declare a conflict of interest on this as well. And I will go and get I'll go get advice on that between now and general committee, but I wouldn't want to participate here and then find out the other way.
Can I ask a process question of the clerk? I'm looking for the remaining voting members on this motion, whether or not we've got quorum to proceed or how such a situation continues. Could you clarify that?
Through you, Councillor Corser, to Councillor Kungle. Yes, the committee can proceed. There's provisions under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act that allows for committee that does not technically have quorum to proceed with the discussions.
May I follow up for additional clarification? Who's the remaining voting members then that stand? Deputy Mayor and
Councillor Corser.
Councillor Corser. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Madam Clerk, has Mayor Nuttall's conflict been noted?
Yes, Councillor Corser, it has.
Okay, for item 8.3, is there anyone that wishes to speak to this item? Oh, sorry, Miss. Sorry, Councillor Thompson, please.
Thank you, Chair Corser. So similar to the last one, I fully understand, and I've spoke with Councillor Reitman several times in regards to this, you know, and hearing around the table that is one thing enough, or do we have to look at other approaches? But I just think, you know, back to my same point, I think it's something we have to wait and see. Because I actually would like to see other things. I'd like to see a 3-hour parking limit in the college area as a pilot project, which I think would alleviate some of the problems. I don't think it's just a winter problem. There's lots of things, but I think until we get the data on the proactive, I think we're just premature. So I'll leave it at that. And I would move to refer this to another meeting in Q2 of 2024.
Could I clarify if that's a refer or defer?
Now you've confused me.
I'm confused myself. It's okay. Can you confirm a deferral, please? Is that what I'm asking? Sorry. I'd ask you again.
Through Councillor Corser to Deputy Mayor Thompson, I believe you would like a deferral similar to the last motion to the same time frame as the previous motion to Q2 2024.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk, for clarifying that for me. Is there anybody at this point? I can ask if anybody not on the committee would like to speak to this item. Councillor Hamilton?
Thank you. Through you, Councillor Chair Cursor. I don't want to echo what Rob said, but I just want to say I agree with you, and I'm supportive of what you said. This is a tough one, and Councillor Reitman, I understand the issues in Ward 1 and how do we tackle them, and I do feel like we need a multi-pronged approach here, which we kind of discussed earlier. I'm nervous with introducing the type of licensing. I think there's a lot of consequences when you go down that path, and I've looked at the other municipalities that have gone down that path, and the example from Waterloo, and I do have a number of concerns with it. So I think it's premature. I would even like if we can have a follow-up presentation on the pros and cons of it. For me, I'm not comfortable endorsing moving forward with the bylaw at this time. I think, again, we should circle back in a year, but I'm seeing that this item has come up, I think, year over year over year. So also I'm wondering, I mean, has there been a change from the staffing perspective in terms of going down this path, or why do we keep bringing this up and either deferring it or canceling it or not going ahead? So again, if maybe I could defer to Ms. Banting to comment on that.
Through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Hamilton. There has not generally been a change in legislation. We do not have any different powers of authority to enter homes. Even as you would have seen in the other reports that were circulated, we do not have any different legislative authority to request eviction of tenants if someone doesn't have a license. So those matters have not changed. There have been some successes and some full-on failures in other municipalities when they've attempted these types of things. But I think it's obviously up to committees such as this and members of council which way we want to go in the future. But we can start at least with some of the proactive enforcement.
Thank you. I appreciate your feedback and comments.
Can I speak to this? Okay, I just wanted to make some comments about this because I believe that my ward probably is not unique in this challenge, but Ward 4 has some older community And we have larger yards, and we have homes that people are retiring or moving out of to downsize that are being purchased and broken up to be rooming houses. We've seen this I've heard it continuously at the doors, and it has become a real challenge in our neighborhoods because those neighborhoods were not created to have those kind of parking issues. They were not created to have multiple units in their backyards. They just is the parking alone is a nightmare, the issues, and I've heard it time and time again. So there's some serious, looking at the previous amendment that come up to council, the previous motion that come up to council, I think that we're going to see a lot more of this across the older neighborhoods in our city. And I have a grave concern about this being unchecked. And I would be very interested in delving much more into the motion that you brought forward and being more educated in all aspects of it. And I would, I'm not against deferring it, but I certainly am excited to revisit it. Sorry, Councillor Kungl, I missed you. I'm sorry.
No, it's good. So again, I'm non-voting member, but what I'm glad to see a deferral, at least around a movement in support, because I do believe there's a lot of conditions for conversation. And there's a lot of, I believe, unintended negative consequences that maybe we haven't looked at from this. So I struggle with, completely appreciating the attention, but don't see strong alignment to maybe the outcomes that we want through this, and would love to dive deeper. And I wanted to take a moment just to kind of pull us back to say, we had a motion before us where staff brought forward a lean process to save the city $300,000 by changing the way in which we bill for water. Out of a compassionate approach, knowing that there was a case for there to be a ripple effect around landlords recovering unknown costs about what they would have to manage, that maybe they would replace that with increasing rental rates. Out of that compassionate case, we actually rejected a process from staff that would save us operating dollars. So again, I think the ways in which we voted or taken things into consideration need to be revisited about, what's in the city's interest financially, what are the impacts on our decisions from a tenant, what we control, what we can't control, but also making sure that there's some fairness along the way around not penalizing people that are doing it well and doing it right. And I'm hearing that from residents.
Councillor Rima.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I said earlier, I'm not opposed to delaying this for a while. And I very sincerely hope that the enhanced enforcement and proactive enforcement will actually work. I have some grave doubts about that. But I'm prepared to let that run its course. However, I definitely will want to have, if there's no improvement, and it needs to be a serious improvement, then definitely 2 years from now, we will need to take this kind of approach. I don't think there's any other alternative. Thank you.
Any other comments around the table? Questions? No. So we're going to vote to defer the motion. I'm sorry, we're going to vote to defer the motion till Q2 2024. Q2 2024. Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk. Okay, so let's call the vote. Oh, sorry, Councillor Thompson, my apologies.
No, I'm just voting.
My fault. Okay, thank you. Okay, so I can call the vote now. Everybody is voting. That was just him and me. That's right, just the two of us. That's right. So I vote as well. So it's unanimous. Thank you very much, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Counselor Corser, for that. And I'm just calling adjournment. That's basically it. So I just need one quick mover for adjournment.